Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We are back with another episode of Daily Palantir. We have a lot to talk about on today's episode. First of all, thank you to everyone who subscribed over the weekend. I think we got about 100 new subscribers over the weekend, so thank you for being here. This is a show that I do every day called Daily Palantir, where we cover Palantir every day, daily. Now, today we did not have the best news that came out this morning, and I want to discuss that news and I'm trying to wrap my head around it. I'm trying to gain more perspective. I'm trying to do more due diligence so I can give a better informed perspective. But I'll give my initial thoughts today. I talked to some people and got a better understanding, but it has to do with Palantir's government business. So we're going to talk about that. Wall Street Journal article came out on that government business. We'll discuss that. Joe Lonsdale, Palantir co-founder, went on CNBC today, had some things to say about the government business as well. We're going to discuss that. And before we get into everything, we're going to look at price action because price action has been pretty crazy today. Let's get into it. Okay, so first thing we'll do is price action and get a little bit of an understanding of what's going on with Palantir. Right now, up 4.47%. We did hit 1830 this morning. Let me get it right here. Yeah, 1835 actually this morning, which was really nice to see. At that point, it was up almost 9% on the day, and we've sold off since then about 1753. Now, why are we up 4.4% on the day right now? And one point did we go up 9%? The entire market opened with a lot of momentum as soon as we had a market open. Nvidia right now, another stock that is very important for Palantir. More GPU demand means more software AI demand. $597 right now in Nvidia, trying to close in on $600. Nvidia is basically up 20% in the past 10 days, which is not easy to do for a company of that size. So you're going to get some derivative effects on other AI companies as well. Snowflake, I think, has had a good day as well. Snowflake right now at 197. That's a $65 billion market cap, up about 2% on the day. So overall, good day for Palantir. I mean, look, we were stuck in the 16s for a while. I would say for about a week. And at one point we got to 1590. And so about 2 weeks, we were in that 1580 to 1630 range, and seems to have broken out to 1753. Why is this happening? I think it's purely macro. The entire market is doing well today. There's some sectors that are coming down, but overall, market is doing well. On top of that, I think people are excited for earnings. I mean, the volume, if you look at Palantir, 64.07 million shares traded, and it's 1:30 p.m. So it's about 4 hours since the market opened. I mean, like, that's an absurdly high amount. I mean, usually we don't get that until the end of the day, if we even get to that 60 million number. So we're in there for 4 hours into the day. I think either institutions are getting excited, or the other reason some investors are getting excited is because earnings is coming up on February 5th, which is basically 2 weeks away from now. And investors are thinking, you know what, maybe this is going to be an AI story that plays out. Obviously, Karp's statements at Davos last week were pretty exciting. Thinks the company can double. U.S. commercial products is growing so much that he's having to rebuild the entire company. That can definitely get institutional investors excited and say, hey, instead of buying Microsoft at $3 trillion, we might as well buy Palantir at $35 billion. When you look at it from that perspective, it seems obvious, like, all right, AI play, that's way cheaper than Microsoft. But on its fundamentals, Palantir is obviously not cheap given the growth is not there. So guidance is going to determine everything when it comes to Palantir. One quick thing I want to show before we get into the Wall Street Journal article. I tweeted this over the weekend, and I think this is really important just for everyone to understand in regards to what I think about for Palantir's business. There's basically 3 metrics that I'm looking at, and these 3 metrics are the only metrics that I care about. So number 1 is customer count growth. We need to grow customers quarter over quarter higher than the current stagnated 8%. I'm hoping for closer to 10 to 12% this quarter. If we do that, and that accelerates with the boot camps and the client conversion from the boot camps accelerating, we should get to about 750 customers by the end of the year, hopefully 1,000 by Q2 2025, and maybe even 1,000 by the end of this year if we really scale. Not expecting that, but let's see what happens. Net dollar retention, this has been going down all of 2023 and needs to start a reversal to show our existing clients are continuing to pay more than what they signed up for. This means monetizing AIP from some of those existing clients. Right now, NDR is at 107%. It was at 125 about 4 quarters ago. So it's come down precipitously. That needs to change just to prove that, we are a SaaS company that can get more out of our customers. And then finally, guidance. This is the most important part. We can miss every metric on Q4 earnings, but guide for 25% and be back to a high growth tech company. If guidance comes in below 20%, I think the stock price will get ugly. If it comes in at 25% or above, we can justify the multiple and potentially expand the multiple having a strong 2024. My guess, being very conservative and not trying to get my hopes up, is around 22 to 23% guidance in terms of growth year over year. Right now, we're about 16%, with the expectation that by mid-2024, that guidance gets raised to 25 to 30%. If that happens, I think it's a good scenario. I think it at least justifies the multiple to an extent that we have right now. But, if we don't get there, then it's going to be hard staying in this $18, $19 range. So overall, price action good today. But we'll see what happens over the next coming days. All right, so now let's get into the Wall Street Journal article that we saw today. This was a tough article. I was actually running in the morning at about 7:40 a.m. on the treadmill. This article was published at 7 a.m., and I was listening to the article while on my run, trying to get a better understanding of what's going on. Palantir's momentum hurt by slowing growth in government deals. Individual investors have bolstered the company's share price and their enthusiasm for a new AI data platform. Ironically, the stock is up 5% today, even though, Wall Street Journal, big publication, when they make a piece on a company, a lot of people tend to read it. So the piece is definitely bearish. Let me start off with that. Let me give my high-level overview thoughts, and then I'm going to read a couple quotes. Piece is bearish. I wouldn't say it's a hit piece. I've read hit pieces on Palantir before, personal attacks on the company, all that stuff. This is not a hit piece. This is just looking at the raw numbers and saying, look, the government business is slowing down. And so if the government business is slowing down, the article is basically questioning, how do you justify the sales multiple if the government business is 43% of revenue for Palantir and it's growing at 10, 15%. It's really not growing at an expeditious rate that you would expect for a high growth tech company. Granted, I think there are some flaws that the article has in understanding the government business, but let's go through a couple of quotes I wanted to read and then keep going from there. Revenue growth from U.S. government contracts has slowed in recent quarters, precipitating a reversal of the company's stock market ascension. Analysts and investors point to Palantir's loss of momentum in corners of the federal government as agencies and as the Defense Department are increasingly looking at competitors that are less expensive than Palantir and offer more flexible tech solutions. Now, this right here is the gist of the article, okay? A lot of the article kind of focused on the fact that the DoD is trying to find competitors that are cheaper and are open sourced versus closed source. Palantir, obviously a closed source software, not an open source software, and they're trying to find cheaper companies. Now, the one mistake I think the article makes, and I'm going to go deeper into that point, is that Alex Karp has said, and they even quoted him in the article, that the government business is a cyclical business. It doesn't happen all at once. This year is an election year, so you might not have as many government deals because there's so much instability in terms of, the White House, campaigning, elections, all that stuff. So, 2010 to 2020, they catered a government business at 30% year over year. Some years it was 80% growth, some years it was 10% growth. And Karp has reiterated this over and over again. He even gave a quote to the Wall Street Journal that's like, look, this is how the government business is. You can't judge it quarter over quarter. Judge us over the next 5 years. And if you have patience and, you trust in the fact that our products are some of the best products for the government, then we are going to be able to cater it at a high percentage. The problem is, and so that's the thing I think the article doesn't necessarily fully get, but one thing that the article does say is that government agencies are kind of changing how they procure software. So they quoted our boy Rishi, who has a $5 price tag on Palantir. That's ridiculous, but nonetheless, they quoted Rishi. Government agencies are changing the way in which they work with Palantir. They don't want to put all their eggs in one basket because Palantir is expensive. He's not necessarily wrong with that. I mean, Palantir is expensive software. Now, it's software that gets the job done, but obviously it is more expensive than, than usual, than definitely from other companies. The U.S. Army, a top Palantir customer, is using more tech companies for each project to avoid becoming too reliant on any single company or technology and to encourage competition to keep prices lower, said an Army official. We want to make sure we get the most participation from an industry and the most diversity. The Army also wants more control over its data than its software vendors have given. Brian Rafferty, project manager of the Army Data's platform, said at a November presentation on Army plans, "My contention is that all the data that is generated by the Army is Army data," adding that this might cause some discomfort and consternation at the technology companies that sell to the Army. He didn't specifically mention Palantir, but the argument is, well, if Palantir is more closed source versus open source, then the Army's data has to go through Palantir software versus it just purely being proprietary to the Army, which is why there could be some discomfort there in regards to Palantir and the government. Some U.S. government customers have grown frustrated with Palantir over limits to how they can access their own data. The company's practice of sometimes charging customers when they want to run a new analysis using existing data on Palantir software has driven up the cost for some agencies, said former Palantir employees. So you got actual Palantir employees saying that, hey, when we work with the U.S. government, some of these customers got upset at us because we would charge them to be able to run analyses on their own data. That was higher costs. They wanted to do that for cheaper costs. And that was not good for overall relationships with the government. Competitors include the longtime government contractors Deloitte and Booz Allen Hamilton. These are consulting firms that have been landing government contracts for data analytics, Palantir sweet spot, sometimes replacing Palantir according to contract award announcements. And that is kind of the gist of the article right there. I'll put the article in the description, but that is the core gist of it, which is that government wants more open source versus closed source, and they think that Palantir is charging a little bit too much money. And you got to ask yourself, the government is $34 trillion in debt. We don't know what the new administration is going to look like in 2024, or if we have the same administration in the United States. I don't know what percentage of the U.S. government business is part of the overall government business revenue, but I would imagine it's close to like 70 to 80%. I mean, Palantir is going to do about 1.3 billion in TTM from government revenue in 2023. I would imagine the United States is like close to $1 billion of that money, maybe $890 million of them. Like the U.S. government really does matter when it comes to Palantir. Now, we also have Shyam Tweet, who took a jab at the Wall Street Journal, CTO of Palantir. He probably knew this article was coming out, so he put this on Twitter yesterday at 6 p.m. And when he put it out, I didn't think much of it. I wasn't really understanding it. Now that the Palantir article came out this morning, I understand why he put this out yesterday. So this is what he said. Open source software is often used as a straw man for why software should be cheaper, but there's a deeper incentive that's actually at play. To really understand the potential role of open source, we need to understand the cold, hard business logic behind open source, wonderfully explained in this classic post. Excerpt. I noticed something interesting about open source software, which is this. Most of the companies spending big money to develop open source software are doing it because it's a good business strategy for them, not because they suddenly stopped believing in capitalism and fell in love with freedom as in speech. Basically saying, like, you know, companies aren't doing open source because they want to help the community. It's because it's a good strategy for them at the end of the day. He says, either I'm commoditizing a complement that enables more wallet to be available for my category of software, or I'm doing it to reduce friction to a sale by delivering anti-lock-in mechanisms. Basically, it's easier to sell open source, therefore it's good business, which is the critique he's arguing about business. He then says, in today's Department of Defense context, open source is maximally aligned with companies that bill hours and put butts in seats, aka Booz Allen Hamilton and Deloitte consulting firms. Open source only solutions enables traditional labor-based system integrators to commoditize their complement, i.e. their software, and retain maximum share of government budget for billable hours. Almost like a lawyer that, you know, wants to keep charging you billable hours, so they find a way to keep doing it. That is what open source software is versus what closed source software is, which, you know, actually works at the end of the day and is not just trying to bill you, but trying to work. And in a balanced market, this is a powerful way to drive competition and price performance of commercial software companies. To justify the value above open source alternative, it spurs innovation, which makes Palantir work harder. That's a good thing. However, the problem comes when the government kills the market mechanism by ignoring speed, capability, or readiness and values the illusory concept of owning the software, i.e. open source, by considering open source or GOTS only options. And this problem further hurts American prosperity, since $1 spent by the government on labor is worth $1 to $2 of wealth in American retirement accounts. The same $1 is worth $5 to $20 when spent on software. Basically, he's saying, dude, if you're going to pay for this open source nonsense and give Booz Allen Hamilton and Deloitte some more money so that A, you feel better because it's open source, and B, you think that you're paying less for software, but at the end of the day, you're just paying by the hour. It's like, instead of getting a good lawyer, you got a crappy lawyer who charges a little bit less, but he's charging you more hours. It's not the right solution. And so what does this mean for shareholders? Well, I think it means that things are getting a little competitive in the government space. I mean, there's no reason the Wall Street Journal will come out with this article unless they genuinely felt that there was a lot more competition in the government space and that Palantir's government business was going to suffer. Obviously, we're seeing it in the numbers that the government business is just not growing. You know, U.S. commercial is growing at above 30%. That's great. And that, I hope, can carry the company in top line revenue growth. I'm not positive it can, not just U.S. commercial. Even if it's growing at 30, 40%, there's, you know, international commercial, international government, and then U.S. government. If that's just lagging, it's going to average out to like 16, 17%, which is basically where we are right now. So I think investors should definitely take this seriously. This is not a hit piece. This is something where, yes, there is an argument that government revenue will CAGR later, you know, over the next 5 years, and we'll get more revenue coming in. But it is something to take into account that if the government wants more open source projects and they want stuff that's cheaper and they're, you know, almost 40 trillion in debt, well, they might end up going with solutions that aren't as good. Now, for the long-term, you know, taxpayer, that's horrible because you want something that works at the end of the day. But if the government is so ideological about this and they want a ton of competition, so they don't want to only be relying on Palantir, you might see a decrease in that government business or in those government contracts. Now, in general, I think this is a little bit, that's why I said in the beginning of this episode, this is not enough data for me to really understand this. Like, I need to go a little bit more deeper. And I mean, Palantir obviously just got the Army Vantage extension, which is $115 million. So like they just got $250 million from the Army for R&D in regards to AI and ML. That was September contract. So they've gotten a lot of contracts over the past couple of months. They got the obviously UK NHS contract, which is a nice international government deal. I think the biggest question for me now, based on this article, and just looking at the raw numbers and some of these sources that seem pretty credible in the article, is on Q4, if I had one question I could ask, I would be like, can you please explain to me, are you feeling the competition in the government space heat up? Because I just want you to be honest here. Or is it kind of FUD and I shouldn't worry about it, and government competition is not that big of a deal and you guys are fine? You guys have a lot of strategic allies, assets. You have this whole federal advisory board. You guys are doing your lobbying. You guys are doing what you need to do to grow the government business, particularly in the US. That's the one question I would want to know post this article. So we'll see what happens, but it's something I'm digging into. I will keep you guys updated. It is something that really matters. Obviously, commercial is my bull case for Palantir, but government is a very sticky business, and you don't want to see that necessarily decline. Even if it's growing small, you don't want to see decline. So we will see what happens from there. All right, given we're talking about the government business, let's go to Joe Lonsdale. He is a co-founder of Palantir, and see what he has to say about AI being a technology that impacts productivity, but also why the government needs the best AI software. Let's take a look at what he has to say.
Do you think there's more value in the software piece or the hardware piece? One of the things that I think has been fascinating to hear, people were talking about it actually in Davos, is Sam Altman, who was there from OpenAI, clearly has been looking around to try to raise money to actually start manufacturing chips. In the old world, chips were never considered a valuable thing to do. And by the way, maybe in 10 years from now, there'll be an overabundance of chips and nobody will care about chips anymore. But for the next 5 or 10 years, it seems like people won't be able to get enough of them.
The infrastructure of chips is critical to make this work. If you can make chips commoditized, that means the rest of us are going to be all very well off because you're going to be applying it to the whole economy. I mean, the most money is going to be made, frankly, for the S&P 500, for the big companies that are more productive overall. That's where the real money gets made if this works. But we need the chips to do that. I mean, Sam's thinking, how can I apply this technology? How do we scale it? There's a scarcity of chips. So it's really smart to do.
And in the context of Palantir, if we solve the chip problem, Sam Altman, rumors are out there that he's trying to start his own kind of like AMD or NVIDIA in the United States. That's good for Palantir. Palantir, at the end of the day, they get more business by companies wanting to operationalize AI. In order to do that, you need more GPUs, you need more semiconductors, you need more chips. In order to do that, you got to end up building those companies. An overabundance of that just means way more demand for Palantir.
In the defense world, how do you think it fundamentally changes things? I mean, we were talking to your co-founder, Alex Karp, about sort of how AI is going to impact his business. He's leveraging ChatGPT and some of these other large language models as well. So the question is, do you have to create your own model? Is it really just about taking somebody else's model and applying it to what you're doing?
Well, it was really cool. I guess OpenAI opened up to defense now. But listen, in the defense world, software is becoming more important. AI makes software determinative in defense. We already have all these new companies needed in defense because the old big primes, the big legacy defense contractors, they're really good at hardware. They're pretty bad at software. Thanks to AI, you now desperately need all the new companies in defense because there's a bigger gap there.
What does that mean, determinate? Like determine?
It means
or you mean determining what lines you kind of follow?
It means determining like what technologies are dominant in warfare, right? So if you have AI being as good as it is now, suddenly it really, really matters to have the best software. If you're going to be doing, like, you want to get a certain amount of money for a certain amount of outcome, right? So if you're going to be building 1,000 small autonomous drones for some kind of battle scenario, if you have AI, you desperately are going to need the best software companies involved in that. Otherwise, you're going to lose that battle. You're going to not be deploying it correctly.
Hey, Joe, I know that, I think...
Now, that's the core point I wanted to show you guys from the interview. I'll put that in the description as well. But this was a really important point, right? His basic argument here is that if we are going to operationalize AI throughout the government, and the example he gives is you're building 1,000 autonomous small drones, you need to have the Palantirs and the Andurils of the world integrated into that process. There needs to be the best level of software focus to be able to make sure that those autonomous drones actually are effective, don't have massive casualties. They're probably going to have significantly less casualties, in my opinion, than a human operating those drones, right? So that's where the sort of benefit of AI comes in terms of the moral sense of how it can be used on the battlefield. But imagine if it had 0 casualties. Imagine if it was just operating in the exact way that it needs to operate. You need the best software companies there. And now you think about open source software, which is what we just talked about. I don't know if that gets the job done. And I think Joe Lonsdale understood that when he was on CNBC today as well, saying you need the best of the best. You can't have a Booz Allen Hamilton creating you AI-based software for autonomous drones. You need an Anduril, you need a Palantir, like you need these companies that are doing it. And that's why we see so much money from VCs entering into the defense tech space. That's why FedStart is so important for Palantir, because they're trying to take pieces of all these different companies, trying to sell to the government and help them and be able to make some money off of that as well. But you need the best of the best. And a lot of VCs are betting that there's going to be more demand from the government for the best of the best, particularly for AI, ML, defense tech software. And the hardware really means nothing. The drone means nothing if it doesn't know how to operate autonomously. So from that perspective, look, I think the government business is very exciting for Palantir. There's JADC2, there's Titan, there are so many contracts down the pipeline. I don't want to make it sound like Palantir doesn't have any deals coming up or anything like that. It's just going to take a while to play out, and I'm very curious, and I will be doing all the research over the next couple months, trying to get a better glimpse of how the government business is doing, why, there may be some more competition, and if it really is just a money thing where Palantir has to lower their prices, or do they have to do some lobbying and convince the government agencies that you don't want to go with these consulting firms, you actually want to go with software that works, not just software that makes you feel good about it because you're paying less money. So we'll see what happens over the next coming months. All right, everybody, that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Please subscribe to dailypalantir.substack.com, my free email and newsletter every single day on Palantir, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye, everybody.